Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, will passage of the More Housing Now plan by the County Council mean more housing right now? And will Governor Moore's re-election bid and presidential ambitions be hurt by a poor Maryland economy? And finally, should Democrats have a reason for hope or for fear 6 months into Trump 2.0? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former County Council member and CEO of SkillSmart, Mike Knapp, and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Party, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. As we approach the end of July and the anticipated August recess for most governments, we're going to take a deep dive on the overall status for the various jurisdictions, local, state, and federal. First up, our own Montgomery County Council and Executive. Mike, there's a lot going on right now, as 3 members of the council are actively running for county executive, and every day you hear about a new endorsement from somebody, some past official or whatnot. The county executive is weighing a run for an at-large seat in the county council. And in the meantime, all the council members are trying to make sense of the repercussions from the downsizing of the federal government. Now, in this picture, Mike, the overarching question is, what are the particular issues that the council is focused on, and how right are these priorities? Seems to me that there's a lot of mud being thrown against the wall just to see if it'll stick.
Well, I think it's a good observation. I think one of the real challenges that we have had in the county for quite some time is that there really is no particular set of priorities. The county executive hasn't really laid out a vision or an agenda. And oftentimes for the council to work effectively, there really needs to be some framing of what those issues are. And then with the council as a legislative body, it changes its leadership. There's a new president effectively every 11 months. And so whoever comes in as the new president has a set of issues that they'd like to focus on. But then you have now, with 2 additional council members, you have 11 council members. And so basically what they're addressing is whatever the flavor of the week from a legislative perspective is on the agenda based on who's introduced what. And so with no clear direction from the county executive and kind of an amorphous leadership structure within the council itself, there really isn't much of an agenda. I mean, they're trying to, as you said, kind of throw stuff on the wall and see what sticks to try and respond to whatever the latest issue happens to be. There's a lot of talk about we don't want Trump to get us, but nobody can really articulate what that means, and we're going to hold firm on certain issues, but it's not clear what the council's role is, what the county's role is. And while I applaud the effort to try to think about how we can re-employ folks who've been laid off from the federal workforce, I don't know that necessarily hiring in the county and trying to take tax dollars to do that is necessarily the most effective way to focus that, as it is to focus on really how do we get economic development and grow our tax base and our revenue from our businesses.
Yeah, Mike, I'll save this question for a later show, but there's one part of your answer was you were talking about the 11 council members. I'm also wondering, if we should, look back and see if by adding 2 more council members, we've hurt the performance of the legislative body. But as I said, I want to save that question for a
well. Just to add to that real quick, though, I just was talking to one of the staff members, and they said there has been more legislation introduced in this council than in history. And so having more council members now kind of sets it up almost like the state legislature, where it's a race to get all of your legislation introduced so you can show that you are doing something. So that's how you kind of distinguish yourself. And so as opposed to really orienting yourselves around key issues and getting those addressed, it's what can I introduce and how do I make sure that I'm having an impact from that perspective?
Well, that kind of dovetails into what I was going to ask Mark. Mark, this council seems very proud of itself for passing the More Housing Now plan, which adds multiple zones for duplexes, townhomes, and apartments in areas of the county that are along public transportation corridors. But how is this really going to affect the supply of affordable housing?
It really isn't. I mean, it may have some impact at the margins, but it certainly is not going to address the issue. I'm struck by a piece that was written by Mac Larimer. It was in the Maryland Reporter. It's also in the Direct Line News as well. The focus is on the ag reserve. We've got 93,000 acres in the ag reserve, and he does the math about just taking 1,000 acres of that, and the kind of housing that could be included at that. And this is something after the state's already going to take a certain amount of that land and go into solar farms. I think that council was simply too narrowly focused in its proposal and didn't really look at the real opportunities to expand the availability of housing, affordable housing in the county.
Well, Mike, Adam Panucco has done some brilliant work examining the negative impacts of rent control that it has on development. But, the city of Rockville, seeing the challenges that the county has had, just rejected a proposal for the second time in 9 months. So is the council, again, pushing plans that have negative consequences, not progressive consequences?
No, I think they are, and I think it's funny. I was just talking to a legislator from a neighboring jurisdiction who thanked me for the efforts of Montgomery County in rent control because it's helped them to make sure that they don't pass it in their jurisdiction. And I think when you look at the More Housing Now initiative, while it's nice to think about doing that when you're starting from the premise of that we've already put in place rent control, and so we've already stymied the investment in new housing units, and then try to layer some other things on top of that to spur on new housing. I think you're really cross purposes, and so you're just not going to see much, and you're not going to see the investment coming from folks. I mean, Adam's done a great job of talking about how effectively we've been redlined in the real estate and development industry, and so great, you increase zoning, but if nobody's going to make an investment in new housing, it doesn't make a difference what your zoning looks like.
Yeah. So, Mark, I want to turn to transportation policy because you've done some good work recently on what's going on with transportation. It seems to me that the plan by the council to make all bus rides on the ride-on bus free ignores the fact that people really don't want to ride the bus anymore.
Well, yes, the piece I wrote really reflected on the way the ridership has gone down. And a substantial part of that decline comes because there's Lyft, because there's Uber, because people kind of make a time as money calculation to use alternative ways of getting around. And I think that's a way we ought to be thinking about transportation. We also be thinking about it in terms of some of the mass transit that depends on dense population. Unfortunately, we're locked into the purple line, but in Maryland, we at least have the opportunity to not go forward with the red line, despite what the governor wants. Going forward, we also have this Waymo. This is sort of self-driving vehicles that may well further impact the way people who don't have cars or aren't using cars can get around.
Yeah. So what do you think, Mike? I mean, transportation-wise, I just find that, taking taxpayer money to support ride-on buses and giving it away for free is counterproductive.
Well, but I think it's interesting because really it's not a policy in isolation, right? And so to Mark's point, that if you're going to have transit, you've actually got to have density that enables people to be able to, enough people to be there to leverage that transit. And so when we've talked about bus rapid transit in Montgomery County, the county executive in particular, we want to put bus rapid transit into effect, but we don't want to actually increase the density along those corridors. And we actually put rent control in place, so it stymies the ability to actually get the level of density that gets you the kind of ridership that you need. So it's not just transportation or housing. These pieces actually impact each other, and if you do one poorly, it has an effect on the other one.
Well, it's interesting, and I remember, I'm an old guy, so I remember the increase in density and from the building of the metro lines, and how that had a positive impact along the development of housing and businesses here in Montgomery County. Let's go on to our second topic, which is I want to talk about the state of the state a little bit, but also more importantly about Governor Moore. And it's been reported that Governor Wes Moore traveled to South Carolina to speak before the Blue Palmetto Dinner, a gathering of Democratic leaders. And there he met with advisors of former Presidents Obama and Biden. Now, Mike, far be it from me to be the skunk at the picnic. But yesterday on the Larry O'Connor show on WMAL, Congressman Andy Harris from the Eastern Shore derided the economic performance of the Moore administration, calling it a failure. And he pointed out that when Moore took office, he promised not to raise taxes. Is this going to come back to harm him? Maybe not in 26, but beyond.
Well, first of all, imagine my shock that Congressman Harris derided the Democratic governor of Maryland. I am stunned.
Well, at least you didn't call me the skunk. That's
no, but I might. It could be Congressman Harris,
or did that on WMAL,
or that. No, I mean, I think the challenges that Maryland is facing from an economic perspective are certainly going to impact the governor's ability to be able to point to successes. I think what we just saw yesterday that we've lost 12,000 jobs as a result of the federal layoffs. I mean, these are real and are going to have a significant impact. So even if things were going well in the state, which they weren't necessarily from an economic perspective before, things like that are going to have a very significant impact. And so I think it's going to be really important for the governor to look at the policies that are out there, in particular this IT tech tax. When we start looking at that and those things are going to have an impact at a time when we need to be moving in a different direction. And I think that it will be challenging, and he's going to have to work hard to identify some economic wins. And I'm not sure where those are right now.
Well, it is amazing how popular Governor Moore is. Yesterday on a show, I saw, oh my gosh, I can't believe the commentators, the guy from Louisiana, was talking about the Raging Cajun was talking about new leadership for the Democratic Party, and he said Wes Moore is the real deal, and James Carville, thank you. My brain the hard drive finally kicked in, and I remembered the guy's name. Anyway, he was praising Governor Moore.
I think the message that he has, I think the vision that he has, I think all of those are very good. And I think he can package it in a way that not many in the Democratic Party can. I think the challenge is, and this is often the case in politics, is you have the ability to present that, and then you also have the reality of the outcomes of governance, and those two pieces need to marry up. And I think I think part of what he's doing is great. I think the other part is going to have to shore up a little bit.
So that leads to you, Mark, and the obvious question is: there's an election in 26. There's obviously some weaknesses in the governor's performances, and we're going to see probably another repeat of what we saw in the last General Assembly, where they were scrambling for dollars. They were dialing for dollars. Is this going to come back to hurt them, and will Republicans be able to exploit that weakness?
Well, there's even some scuttlebutt about possible special session in the fall. I don't know, but you're right. I mean, the challenges that the state face with the budget were not fully addressed, and so there's still a strategic decision, I think, that the governor needs to make about Kerwin, about the blueprint, as to whether we're going to continue to go down that road of trying to fund something when the revenues aren't there, and it can only be funded by an increase in taxes and fees and everything else. And you've raised obviously 2028 and the presidency. I think that fits into that. Is he going to run as the sort of captive of the teachers union, which are frankly not as popular as they were 30, 40 years ago for a variety of reasons? Or is he going to be able to separate himself and demonstrate some independence and show that he supports education, but not necessarily beholden to simply a model that equates spending money and more money with better results?
Mike, the power of the governor has been, restricted by the General Assembly, because it used to be he presented a budget and they had very little ability to make any changes to that budget.
Right.
Now that it's wide open, they can spend almost as much money as they want. So are we going to see, is the real issue Moore's ability to control the General Assembly, or are there other factors at play?
No, I mean, I think that really is an issue. And it almost goes back to where we started our conversation on the council. When you have that many legislators that have good ideas and good intent, but don't necessarily have to be responsible for all of the outcomes, I think that creates a real challenge. And I think, up until a few years ago, the governor's position in Maryland was one of the most powerful in the country, given its statutory role, and that has been certainly cut back. And I think that has made a challenge. And I think a lot of people want to go back, as Mark was just indicating, and say, look, we're spending a lot of money on the blueprint. I don't think this is a binary choice, as is often the case. I don't think we don't have to scrap the blueprint, but we could certainly spring out those expenditures in a way that are more manageable and be able to actually also measure the outcomes of what we're seeing as a result of that, and be able to then show how we're benefiting, which then further allows you to double down on more investment later on. And I think,
Mark, I'm going to give you the last word, but I really want to focus on this question. Just recently, a poll came out, or a report came out, that showed that Maryland's federal employment is at a all-time low. How's this going to affect things for Governor Moore?
Well, this is a challenge for the state generally, which is that our economic development program, historically, not just Governor Moore, has been get more federal jobs, more federal offices in the state. We saw that with the FBI. We had an echo of this in the 90s when the Clinton administration reduced federal employment. We're certainly going to see more of this in the Trump administration, not just within the region, but also moving out of the Washington area altogether.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mike. Stay tuned for our examination of the national political scene. And should Democrats have reason for hope or fear 6 months into Trump 2.0? Welcome back. There's been a lot of hand-wringing going on in the Democratic Party. And Mike, a recent opinion piece by Kim Stossel in the Wall Street Journal stated, this is the headline. This is what shocked me. Democrats' autopsy is a flop. The party is searching in all the wrong places for an answer as to why it lost in 2024. I mean, that sounds like a country western song, Is it all doom and gloom?
well, I mean, I think it is a real challenge. I think we live in an era where people want to assume that whatever happened from a thing, and they want to be able to fix it quickly. I think the reality is that what happened in the presidential election was the result of a lot of activities over a significant period of time, and that doesn't get fixed fast. And so I think that the Democrats we've not been able to articulate how people are benefiting, and I think it's been difficult to demonstrate specifically how people are benefiting from policies they put in place. And so I think it's really important to step back and go, where do we start to show the true tangible benefits of what we're doing and the leadership that we have on the ground in mayorships, in gubernatorial areas, in specific cases that you can point to, and that doesn't lend to a quick fix.
Well, focus groups, have come out and said that, the Democrats are too woke, too weak, and out of touch. So who are they going to use to be the model for leadership?
I think to me that's the answer to the question, and it points to going back to jurisdictions, identifying those mayors that are putting programs in place that are benefiting residents across the country, mayors, county executives, places where you are tangibly touching real lives every day, and that you can actually show, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, but as long as you're a resident of our community, you're benefiting from the things that we're doing. And I think we need to be looking high and low throughout the country to identify those people who are doing that and shining a spotlight on them and those programs.
So, Mark, the Hill newspaper had a little bit of a different take on this. I've used this line already a couple times. Democrats find a reason for hope and fear 6 months into Trump 2.0. There is a way to counteract the Trump effect. It seems to be to attack Trump.
Well, that's a strategy that's been used for a long time. I mean, I think we went through all of 2024, And the Democratic strategy was that, at some time things would kick in and people would reject it. Something the other shoe would drop or whatever. The message has been the orange man is bad. Now, obviously in 2026, we'll see what happens. Obviously midterm elections historically have gone against the party in the White House, although not always. I think of 2002 and the first Bush midterm. But even in, basically 3 years from now, in 2028, Trump's not going to be on the ballot, and it's going to be incumbent on Democrats to have an agenda that's fairly specific and is going to address all the issues that you've already referenced.
It seems to me that if the Democrats are going to be successful, they need to find another Bill Clinton. And I don't mean Bill Clinton just because he was a moderate, but Bill Clinton because he was probably the last Democratic presidential candidate and president who recognized that we had external foes. We had to concentrate on Russia still, but now we have to concentrate on China and Russia. There needs to be a kind of a return to the past where we had clear national goals and national vision. And I don't know if that's going to happen in the next election cycle. Mike, I'll let you take it.
Well, this gets back to the local conversation we had. I think that the definition of what leadership is more than just being to get more views on TikTok or more views on Instagram. It has to be about being visible, understanding how to communicate effectively, and also being able to demonstrate that you can generate results. And I think whoever can begin to put those two pieces together is going to ultimately be successful in the coming years. But we haven't seen a lot of that yet. We're seeing a lot of people getting visibility, but there's not a lot behind it. And so I think that's going to be one of the real big issues. And I think you started this conversation around, could 26 be both a blessing and a curse for the Democrats? And I think interesting that many people are thinking we're going to that we're going to end up with a scenario whereby the Democrats may win, but I think that may pause some of the soul searching that's necessary. And so I think it could be a real challenge.
Thank you, Mike. So Mark, any last thoughts on this before we go to parting shots?
No, I think Mike is the better person to sum up the challenges of the Democratic Party as a response.
Better than you or I, huh? All right, thank you. Stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from the short break. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Mark Uncapher.
Thank you, Casey. One of the disturbing news, as I thought, I saw today in the Bethesda magazine, is that MCPS is considering ending its magnet program. Obviously, there's been a program at Richard Montgomery, an IB program, and also Blair Science and Math, Computer Science. And you read it between the lines of some of the data that's being referenced. One of the reasons apparently is that the composition of the classes includes a lot of Asian and also white students. And so the idea is to spread those students around. I look at the Thomas Jefferson School for Math and Science in Fairfax County, and that is one of the jewels of that particular school system. And it would really be unfortunate for our MCPS not to continue to provide the opportunities that it does to some of our most gifted students, people who could be the promise of the future.
Thank you, Mark. Mike Knapp, your parting shot.
Thank you, sir. 3 issues. 1, Baltimore Banner is coming to Montgomery County to increase our news outlets, which is good, and they're going to be under the guise of the Banner. And so welcome to somebody shining a light on some activities in the county. Second, as we move through summer, the bounty and the harvest of the Ag Reserve will become more and more real. And so I would encourage people to make sure they take advantage of that and go to our farm stands and farmers markets up there and really take advantage of the fresh fruits and vegetables and produce that our farmers are actually producing in the Ag Reserve. And then finally, this is a repeat of something I said previously, but in particular with the reduction to the federal food and nutrition programs, there are children and families that are really out there struggling, and they often are in the summer anyway, because many of the programs that they could take advantage of while they're in school aren't available. And so I would encourage people, as they're thinking about things that they can do, to drop off a little extra to local food bank or look at programs that are providing resources to families that may need further assistance.
Thank you. I want to thank you both. I know we had a little fun today talking about important issues, however. And we're going to take our annual break in August. You know, as I like to say, I'm really French, and I like to go to the Riviera, the Delaware Riviera, I guess you'd call it. And so I'm looking forward to playing some golf and getting sunburned. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.